Hello and welcome to Healing Tips from the Heart, Intuition with Helpers, Healers, and Guides. I am your host, Dr. Lori Hops, licensed psychologist, writer, and artist. I've explored mind, body, and spirit related to intuition, or your personal guidance system, since early childhood. Meet my guests who have learned from their personal and professional lives to explore vast realms of knowing, synchronicities, and overcoming challenges. Their stories may inspire you with tools to enhance your daily living and relationships. Hello, everyone, and welcome my special guest, David J. Laramie, PhD, health psychologist. Welcome. Dr. Laramie believes in systemic and integrative approaches to healing and wellness. He draws on background in many different areas, including psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, emotion-focused, psychedelic, energy, and somatic approaches in his psychotherapy work. He has extensive training from different institutions in psychedelic work, and he's also past president of the Los Angeles County Psychological Association, where he's been was on the board for a very long time, and he remains highly involved in the professional community. And that is where I met you, if I believe, probably through LACPA, probably through LACPA. And well, I've heard of you through LACPA.
Or ACEP.
Well, it was both really, because I knew about you from LACPA, but we hadn't actually met until I met you through a study group that I was in.
Until you set up the study group, right?
Yeah, so that was back, I think, in 2015, 2014, something like that. And you happened to be in the suite of offices where our group was meeting. And so I already knew about who you were the first time we met. So that's a long explanation, but
Yeah, but it was energy that really brought us together because I had told my suite mate Deborah about ACEP. I'd already been trained for a couple of years in it when I said, oh, hey, you like that too? Check out this training that I've done. And then it snowballed from there.
Yeah, I did my training and was waiting to create a study group, and because I did my training out of state, and so I was waiting for people in the Southern California area to be trained. And so then that's how we started meeting. And then when you and I met, I remember we were like, you know, so-and-so, I went to school with so-and-so. It was all that.
Yeah, so we probably did our initial training around the same time.
Yeah.
Huh.
So welcome. I'm so happy to see you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience about yourself?
Well, you know, I alluded to it with the referencing liking systemic, but the older I get, the more I come to recognize just how allergic I am to dogma and simplistic, and ever more drawn to ecological, multi-layered, interacting, mushy, gray, complex ways of understanding. And so anyone that lays down the answer, I tend to be a little wary of.
Okay, fair enough.
Beyond that, in terms of things complex and systemic, I am really into permaculture and spend a lot of time studying ecology, and on the personal level, do that with my family and friends living in nature, and with my wife and kids.
Oh, beautiful. I didn't know that about you. That's really cool. How does that intersect with your professional work, or does it conceptually or in some other way besides the systemic view of life?
Well, it's all certainly in both. So like, on the one hand, the importance of being part of community. You know, I'm, as mentioned in the bio, I'm involved in my professional community. I really understand being connected to and networked with the people around me to be essential. So too in my neighborhood, I live in a neighborhood where people know each other and look out for each other and cooperate, and that's, I think what makes the world go round. And in sort of the more, I guess, worldview uh, overview sense, I think we're constantly being affected by this enormous, complex array of relationships all around us, from quality of the air I'm breathing to the quality of the relationships I had when I was young to, the sunspots happening on the sun, like, and so too the microbes living in my couch. Like, we can understand all of these, the microbes living within me. They're all constantly conspiring to make this moment happen. And there's always so much happening at one time.
That's great that you have the microscopic and telescopic view simultaneously. Not everyone kind of dives into both ends at the same time. And just even those words sound somewhat psychedelic as I say them.
Yeah, it certainly has this kind of fractal quality
For
of,
those who don't know, could you describe what fractal means?
I'll give it a shot. A fractal comes from mathematics, and it describes a recurrent pattern of numbers that can be represented visually, and that looks like a visual image in which, whether you zoom all the way in or zoom all the way out, the kind of fundamental shape or order is there, and so it can be seen on all levels and kind of pervades all of them.
So is that what they mean when they
Maybe
say
that's close.
the micros in the macro and the macros in the micro, like big and small or connected?
Yeah, sure. Or old Hermetic ideas like as within, so without, or as above, so below. I think it's in a similar neighborhood.
Beautiful. So yeah, I haven't really thought about, the state of my couch lately. But you do, and it's like, oh, I think it's time to clean it. But so the notion that there's so much living inside, around, within us, between us, among us, that we sometimes take for granted maybe, or don't realize the impact of, unless there's a problem, or unless we're in some kind of a
Unless,
deep contemplative state, or taking a lot of attention and intention
uh,
to our awareness.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, of course, all that stuff is also acting on us, whether we're paying attention to it or not. Like environmental toxins, I think are really interesting to understand how much those constrain and shape our development.
Yes.
Uh,
And then you know, how do we interact or transmute, in your view, those and other
hmm.
influences, whether it's childhood trauma or environmental toxins or a bad mood?
Yeah, well, as I talk, I'm struck by the sort of two different ways I want to answer. That there's sort of a dialectic between, on the one hand, what I'm saying implies that so much is acting on us that there's no way to like know what all is happening. And so, in that regard, I'm into being uh, humble in knowing what I think is happening, and knowing, thinking that I can act on it, and yet at the same time, yeah, I think it's incumbent on us to try as much as we can in the areas where we can, knowing that it's always kind of limited and in concert with the wild complexity and chaos that's all around. So, well, that's kind of why I like how the framing of like dialectic behavior therapy or ACT, where you talk about accepting everything as it is and trying. Or in EFT, the setup is even though and I like trying to hold on to both.
Yeah, that emotional freedom technique, even though X is true, also Y is true. So even though
Hmm.
I'm suffering right now, I also accept myself as I am, or I realize that I have to just be with what is, whatever your words are. So you're like holding two
Yeah.
different contradictory, apparently contradictory concepts or states of being
Yes.
simultaneously, making room for all of it.
Yeah. Holding them both, and increasingly with my setup phrase, I'm doing adding the aspiration as well.
Of where you're
Like
heading.
yeah, I kind of like incorporating that heading idea,
Hmm.
both with the setup phrase as well as just as an orientation in life.
That's great. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your experiences, either yourself or people that you've worked with, without over, sharing, protecting people's confidentiality, but a personal phenomenological experience with the psychedelics, and that may be informing some of what we've talked about, or other aspects of the micro and the macro, or the acceptance and also change, or how does
Hmm.
psychedelics work, bring it to a different level?
Um, hmm. Stan Groff, one of the great thinkers in all things transpersonal and psychedelic, he often describes psychedelics as still does non-specific amplifiers, and that kind of amplification quality of theirs, I think, is really interesting in the way that it can help really bring forth underlying energies and themes and patterns. And so my involvement with psychedelics has helped to make all of my psychodynamic learning and all of my energy and somatic learning ever more like apparent and obvious and essential. So, for example, like longstanding themes in my life that are things I've worked on in my personal therapy, my spiritual life, group therapies, whatever, all the different modalities I've used over the decades to work on myself. Uh, one of the recurring kind of hang-ups there was this idea of like, oh, it's not my turn, or me being uh, unattended to or dropped.
Mm.
And uh, and so what was really astounding was to experience, as I would in multiple different kind of psychedelic therapeutic contexts, that would keep happening. I would keep getting overlooked and dropped, and there was no way to not see that pattern. Like somehow in the individual, relational, collective experience in these psychedelic spaces, like my inner reality of the world isn't going to be there for me would just completely happen.
Mm.
And it was like unavoidable. Like, of course, yes, it's happening again. There it is. Here's your pattern in your face to be confronted. This isn't like some loose interpretation that the therapist said, and I'm like, yeah, maybe that's true. Like, no, this is rubbed in my face,
Wow. Irrefutable.
completely irrefutable. And then that invites, ideally, if you can hang in with it, some curiosity and level of engagement with it. And how can I start to work with this differently, soften into it, work with it, work against it? Uh, but the way that things like transference and projection that I learned, of course, early in my psychotherapeutic training, like when you're working in a psychedelic context, those phenomena can be so present they like blow you out of the room. Like I've
Wow.
always known about transference, I've always known about projection, I've always known about the primacy of the body, and yet in a psychedelic space with that amplification thing happening, I've had experiences where just holy cow, all the books are 1,000 times realer than I ever even understood the books are, because it's happening right now.
Wow. It's like, at first I had the image of like underlining and yellow highlighter, but this is more like the entire universe is echoing your issue at
Yeah,
full volume.
yeah, no, highlighter doesn't capture the like in your faceness of it.
Wow. There's no
Um,
avoiding.
yeah, and and to reckon with on some level for that as within, so without. Like somehow in the conspiracy between me and the world around me, this is arising. Like, is it in me? Is it outside of me? I don't know, but here it is. It's loud and it's clear,
Wow.
and it's completely mirrored.
Um,
And how that happens is endlessly mysterious for me.
yeah. Well, the image that I have is like the weakest link gets spotlighted and like where like it's like there's a sense of integrity and strength and balance, and then wherever the weak spot is, like then all the resources like magnetize to that. We found our spot.
Yeah,
That's what we're gonna emphasize and delve into. So yeah, I don't know the mechanism either, but it is
yeah.
fascinating. And would you say that that's a pretty universal experience that people have with psychedelics, or is it hard to
Um,
know?
I, I'm really loath to speak with any kind of authority on this stuff, both by virtue of my own lack of seniority in these matters, but also the whole like, you know, I love the idea of like, if you want to make God laugh, tell her your plans. So, we'll see about our theories. Uh, but if I were to opine, it would be that I think if you engage with these things deeply and thoughtfully at some point, this becomes apparent. Uh,
Yeah.
you don't have to find this in these. Certainly, there are all kinds of materialistic and reductionistic and ugly capitalistic ways to use psychedelics. It's part of the upheaval in society right now. But I think if they're engaged with sort of deeply and thoughtfully, then these deeper layers make themselves known.
Yeah. Well, I whatever you lack in knowledge, multiply a million times by for me because I haven't studied in this area, but I know that it's the next wave, and a lot of my colleagues are being trained and very concerned about how this is handled because of the potential for um, a fragile state of being and
Mm-hmm.
influence to uh, basically it's kind of like critical thinking is lowered and experiential felt sense and unconscious material is exaggerated. And so there needs to be care and caution and grounding for the person going through that because they're in a very tender state of being in their consciousness. So I'm aware of that, but I just didn't know if there was maybe also a literature on, and here are some common things to expect that may happen. And that one of them might be that your unconscious material that is tender becomes front row center. So I just didn't know. It's my own
Yeah, well,
naivete.
I think a savvy therapist is gonna prepare uh, patients around that. We're doing this to get into your stuff, and there's something unique about psychedelics around how they bring forward that which needs attention. Um, so that's a thing, but
Mm-hmm.
there are interesting conversations, like new conversations happening in the field, such as, does it need to be part of informed consent that how you think the world works might get changed by this? Um, Things like the technical language is ontologic shock, that
Mm.
someone might go in a hardcore materialist and come away thinking transpersonal thoughts or having encountered weird kind of psychic phenomena that the old materialist worldview couldn't abide?
Mhm.
Do you have to prepare someone for knowing everything could get changed? And they're really interesting questions. Um, but I really do want to echo what you said earlier about caution, because yeah, uh, there's so much risk with these substances, and indeed so much potential, but um, by virtue of that power, there's enormous risk as well. And so things like safety and vulnerability and uh, boundaries and comfort and ethics, which are like part of psychotherapy training from day one.
Yes.
And it's interesting how psychedelics on one hand seem to be like leaving behind some of conventional psychotherapeutic customary approaches, and yet at the same time, the further I go, the more they're like, oh yeah, that psycho 101 stuff matters so very much, even more than you even understood.
Yeah. It's kind of like the idea that when you're moving at such a fast pace that even the tiniest variation can make a huge impact.
Yes. And
I'm seeing that,
that's not someone being wimpy or being too.
not just someone being overly neurotically cautious or imagining something. Like this is some really important, vital caution and care and forethought
Mm-hmm.
that needs to go in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. You know, some people get very thrown by breath work, and it can really be destabilizing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you think, well, you breathe all the time. So what if you like extend your exhale or you hold for certain moments or extend your inhale or whatever and change your pace, faster, slower breath? Really? And it's like, yeah, because it shifts consciousness and it shifts awareness in the body. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I go way back with breath work and think the world of it.
yeah,
And yeah, serious things happen.
yes, yeah. Where breath
Really
work.
serious and mysterious routinely happen.
Yep, super. So I was going to just say, you know, outside of the psychedelics, you know, I'm noticing for myself at least the last couple of years that I have to be really on my game with grounding and centering and mindfulness and discernment even more than before. It's like, I don't know if it's a
Mm-hmm.
factor, it's probably a combination of factor of where I am in my development, but also where our consciousness as a humanity is going and where our planet is going. And you mentioned like sunspots, and you know, we've had a lot of coronal mass ejections lately that are causing these beautiful boreal, you know, auroras and, you know, beautiful colors, but
Mm-hmm.
also the electromagnetic frequencies have been somewhat destabilizing for a lot of people. Sleep problems and a lot more anxiety for some people, or depression, or um, excitement and create bursts of creativity and conflict. I shared a study with you that kind of looked at that
Mm-hmm.
there was some tracking more than 100 years ago of the solar activity and how it influences it, within 5 years of huge bursts of activity, there's tremendous conflict on the planet and also creative expression. And this goes back several hundred years. So really interesting to see these. And we're in that active cycle right now for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great example, and it's certainly true that the science has demonstrated these correlations, and so therefore it's incumbent on us to do whatever we can to be extra centered and extra grounded and extra doing our practices in the face of that noise, and even outside of the sun, if there's ever such a thing. Um, the meta crisis or the poly crisis that's facing our planet these days means that on so many levels, things are more chaotic and more unstable, whether you want to talk ecologically or financially or socially and all of the above. And so I I think to hang in general, and if you want to be a change agent or work in some kind of healing capacity, we have to level up
Yeah,
to
beautiful.
be able to hang in with and bring forth the better angels
Yeah.
in the face of the instability.
Yes. So as you work with these sacred paths, have you found that there's an enhancement of intuitive ability, um, heart opening, or awareness of transpersonal experiences?
Hmm. Yeah, there is. Yeah, I mean, that was some of what always drew me to this work, because I've always been interested in consciousness and mysticism,
Hmm.
kind of forever since I was a kid. And so that's always been there, and I've always interested in the transpersonal. Uh, but just for me personally, in my own training, my own therapy, my own experience lately, what I've been playing with is attending to how cleaning up and attending to the wounds and like attending to the personal level kind of injuries and traumas might be necessary or really useful in being able to open up to to the bigger stuff, or maybe being able to access it more reliably or more stably. So, yeah, for me personally, these days I'm trying to clean up my own trauma so that I can have better access to the beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of
But of
sense.
course, famously, psychedelics can skip you right there sometimes,
Yeah,
not always. Um, but I'm looking to kind of clean my house first.
right. Yep. Yeah. We're coming back around to an appreciation of what people throughout time have done with plant medicine for
Hmm.
journeying, for knowledge, um, for um, expanding personal and community experience. And so it's kind of interesting that it's coming around now as we kind of delve into more technological advancements, quote unquote. But then seeing the plant medicines coming up at the same time is sort of, it's beautiful. And I'm wondering if maybe they'll dovetail, if they'll start to inform each other.
Oh, I think there's all kinds of interesting and exotic ways that happens. Uh, this is a little bit of a digression, but I was always blown away, I don't know, 15 years ago, 18 years ago, um, when kind of simultaneously multiple different people on the internet, I don't think it was uh, any sort of cooperative thing, but a number of people started using the internet to coordinate folks meditating together at once.
Hmm.
And I had a colleague who set up a website, Do As One, to help people breathe together.
Mm.
And then Lynn McTaggart was having people get together and do intention work. And there were multiple different organizations, HeartMath and the Global Coherence Initiative,
Yeah.
been quite mysterious and beautiful. And I trust things like that will happen with psychedelics as well.
So that the technology becomes a point of community.
It could be, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the dream of it in the 90s.
I'm just working on a blog right now about AI and the aura or the biofield and how both systems are rich
Mm.
encyclopedias that can possibly inform one another and may lead to new awarenesses and how we can read both systems, you know. So I was thinking about psychedelics too. It might be interesting to have
Oh,
psychedelic experiences cataloged. I mean, the whole thing with AI and machine learning and stuff is that you feed it a ton of information and then patterns emerge maybe that you hadn't
Mm-hmm.
noticed because you couldn't
Yes.
conceptualize all that data altogether. So
Yeah.
anyway, who
Yeah,
knows?
I think that's fascinating. So you're talking about training an AI on reading auras.
Yeah, I didn't come up with the idea. It's based on it.
Wow.
It's based on an article that was, out of all things, in an engineering journal out of, well, I'm not sure. The journal itself is out of the UK, and I think the authors are maybe East Indian. But anyway, really interesting. So look for the blog. If it's published
Yeah,
by
that
the
sounds
time
really fun.
if it's published by the time of this publishing this podcast, I'll have it in the program notes so people can read. But yeah, so interesting. So is there anything
Hmm.
else that
Right on.
comes to mind as we're kind of like, I feel like we've been sort of journeying in the conversation, but it has this sort of a flow that kind of comes back to the personal and personal responsibility and discernment and internal work. But is there some other thoughts that are coming to you
Yeah.
now or stories?
Well, just one other idea on that emphasis on the personal is uh, going back to where I started with I live in a place that has a lot of community. Um, in the face of such a big, messy, chaotic world in which there is so much to despair about and feel helpless about, um, we've never been able to watch in real time someone's pain on the other side of the earth, but we can do that now.
Hmm.
And that's beautiful and problematic at the same time. Um, and in the face of that, I'm increasingly just into focusing on local, um, doing what I can to attend to myself and those immediately around me in my community. Uh, I don't think that's a resignation. I think that's actually maybe where the leverage lies, is um, focusing in the internal and the near local, and that is maybe how we fight the good fight.
Mm. It's very empowering because we can affect immediate change or attempt to.
Hmm. Yeah, and I also trust that if enough folks are doing that, that the ripple effects move the world.
Yes. And like we started off by saying the macro and the micro and vice versa. So just
Yes.
knowing that you're building community locally and you're getting that immediate feedback of what's right and what's working, what isn't, and feeding you or getting depleted and helping possibly with others and them helping you, that shifts your consciousness to a more open space of not having that debilitating despair or feeling paralyzed. My words, not yours, but
Hmm.
I think a lot
Hmm.
of people are feeling that from media and other things. Like you said, this global awareness of suffering. We also have a global awareness of joy that we don't really get fed on a daily basis. But
No.
yeah,
No.
so but when you're creating that little island of interconnectivity and light and sharing, that that spreads too. That's a different pulsating message
Hmm.
that can go around. I like to do what you're talking about, but also I hold space myself for the collective and sharing that energy vibe you're talking about that I get on a larger scale so that I keep
Hmm.
the door open. Maybe it's a semi-permeable membrane, so not everything rushes in. But I what I want to keep in and out, but to keep that pulsating energy going.
Well, absolutely, but this is one of those differences between you and I, because that is, for me, something that is totally true and theoretical. My own membrane, I don't think is permeable enough yet. And
Okay.
so I I'm totally with you that yeah, our local consciousness is, interrelated and part of a broader sort of field. And I love Sheldrake's ideas around morphic fields. And that like enough of us doing it locally makes it more accessible to other people, even though we may not have a direct relationship with them. But it just uh, be, that consciousness becomes more accessible and available to sentient beings in general. Um, I don't think I'm the best at it, and I hope to get better at that interaction with the bigger.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. Um, I'm sure you are. That cleaning up process allows for more. And,
Yeah.
don't rule out the possibility that you're doing more work than you realize. It's possible
Well,
that you may not be getting the feedback on a conscious level, but that it still happens. So I've been told that I do a lot of work when I'm sleeping, and sometimes I wake up and realize, oh, I don't know what I was doing, but I think I was busy all night,
hmm
going different places and doing different things. So anyway, but we all come to our own passages in our own time. We all have different rhythms and energies. That's what makes for diversity and variety and
hmm
um and creating new possibilities, because we aren't all on the same frequency. That's just a flat line if we would be. So yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's so cool about the dynamic influence of solar cycles, for instance, or, whatever number of other physical things that are acting on us, microbe cycles and sun cycles and day and night and all this different stuff, is that dynamism allows it introduces the energy that lets us make the changes.
Yeah,
Like if everything were static, it would be flat and we wouldn't have diversity and creativity.
right. So I know we're coming to the end, but I want to kind of add in, because our conversation has been less pragmatic and more abstract. I'd like to take it an extra little step of something that I
hmm
struggle with, actually. I understand it on the surface, but I have a hard time when it's in the practicality. And that's this notion that the future informs the past. So if you think of
Mm,
time in a cycle, yeah, if you think of time kind of in spirals or in spheres or in circles or in flow, and that time is a conception of humanity, and that really that's not the way of it fully, it's a model, then theoretically, if
hmm
everything's in the now, then everything is dynamically influencing everything else. And so we think only forward often, not collective, not simultaneous.
hmm
But if simultaneous works, like the drop of water in the pond that spreads out, and not just in a flat way, but in all ways, and then
hmm
anything impinging comes in also, then any kind of shift in consciousness is going to affect everything else. And so I sort of get that until I think about, well, maybe my breakthrough of consciousness is influencing my past understanding of self, and maybe even with generations back, and maybe even in the collective. So you can start to kind of go down the rabbit hole in terms of confusion with all of it. But I think that for me, at least, it's an invitation to be very mindful and selective about where I
hmm
tend to put my emphasis and my
Yeah.
energy.
And I think that's why, in terms of the setup phrase, I'm I'm increasingly into the aspiration. Um, oh well, yeah. That, as we referenced earlier, and you spelled out the um, even though I also that both and quality of the setup phrase with EFT, and then adding the aspiration of and I'm gonna try to, or I'm holding the possibility for this next bigger, better thing. Um, yeah, I think that really highlights what you were just saying, or represents what you were just saying, like the essential possibility,
Yeah.
the essential power when you lean into the possibility of imagining the more better,
Yes.
and that has to be, or ideally is pretty darn conscientious and intentional.
Right.
Yeah, but again, that's one of those ones where I'm trying to get better at.
Yeah.
is the believing, feeling it already to be. And
Yes. It's here
that's
now.
an aspiration for me, is that. Mhm.
Yeah. Without thinking that
Yeah,
you
in the
feel
way that
yourself.
like I know great, right, as I know like great qigong masters can just make it by stepping right into knowing it. And yeah, I'm not quite there yet.
There's always more to learn. Oh,
Indeed.
this has been such a lovely conversation. Just, from couches to multiverses and lots in between, the thread of consciousness that kind of ties it in. So is there anything else you'd like to share
Yeah,
before we end for today?
nothing really springs out here except, yeah, I love how you and I have traced this kind of fractal like uh, in and out quality of both our conversation and what we discussed. And yeah, this is how it works. I love paying attention to it with you.
Yeah, it's great. It's fun. We could kind of go on and on. I know. I'm so grateful that you took the time and to share your observations.
Mhm.
And I know that so much more will be coming in for you because you're dedicated to the path.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the mysteries ahead.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, thank you.
Interrupted again. So if you want to say, I'll just say thank
I
you so
said thank
much.
you. It's been a delight.
Lovely. Yeah, we have a lot of communication from different realms joining us today, I think. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. If you want to learn more, you can visit my website for podcast and resources at hopshealingtips.com. You can also like, share, and subscribe to this channel. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only and is not providing healthcare advice. Please seek guidance from your professional healthcare team should you need assistance.